Jim, but not as we know it, as Dr. Spock never said. The latest evidence of what's already happened to the Arctic suggests that it may already be too late to do much about climate change. We're just going to have to adapt big time. It's more than this year's awful summer, because scientists have told Newsnight that the disappearance of Arctic ice is effectively doubling mankind's contribution to global warming, which rather raises the question of why we should bother not driving to the shops anymore. We'll be discussing that with Peter Lilley, who's written a new report which can be summarised as "Don't Panic," and the new leader of the Green Party in a moment or two. But first, Susan Watts.
So, Jeremy, we've known for some time that the Arctic ice is melting at a rapid rate, but new figures that we've been given suggest that the impact of that melt is effectively doubling mankind's contribution to climate change. Now, when we first saw these beautiful shots of Earth from space, courtesy of the Apollo astronauts, it triggered the green movement. But 30 years since satellites started observing the Arctic in detail, that view's changed. This is what the Arctic looked like in the summer of 1979. And this is what it looked like in 2007. Half of its ice had gone. One of Britain's leading ice scientists is predicting that all of the ice could be gone at the North Pole in summer within a few years. Well, this year there's been another big melt, and we're still a few days away from the official minimum. Professor Peter Wadhams has spent the summer on the Arctic ice, using lasers and robot submarines to get a picture of just how much is left.
That's good. All right, let's go.
He's also taken part in a BBC Two documentary series to be broadcast next month called Operation Iceberg, on a giant berg twice the size of Manhattan, where he had to dodge the odd curious polar bear.
Move along, Peter, move along.
He's seen for himself the dramatic decline in sea ice.
30 years ago, then there was typically about 8 million square kilometres of ice left in the Arctic in the summer, and by 2007, 5 years ago, that had halved. It had gone down to 4 million, and this year it's gone down below that, and it's really heading for oblivion.
And the ice is also getting thinner. The volume of ice at the pole naturally goes up in the winter and down in the summer, but it's been declining over the last 30 years. It's now at the lowest level since records began. Estimates that the North Pole could be ice-free in summer in a few years contrast with the official view of the Met Office, that the Arctic will not be completely free of ice before the summers of 2030. But it's the effect of losing all that white ice that matters. The polar ice cap acts as a giant parasol, reflecting sunlight back into the atmosphere in what's known as the albedo effect. 30 years ago, the ice looked like this. The Arctic ice covered 2% of the Earth's surface, reflecting most of the sun's rays. But half of that ice has now gone, and open water absorbs far more of the sun's energy. Professor Wadhams told us parts of the Arctic Ocean are now as warm in summer as the North Sea in winter.
Over that 1% of the surface of the Earth, you're replacing a bright surface which reflects nearly all the radiation falling on it by a dark surface which absorbs nearly all. And the difference, the extra radiation that's absorbed, is, from our calculations, the equivalent of about 20 years of additional carbon dioxide being added by man.
If his calculations are correct, that means that over recent decades, the melting ice cap has put as much heat into the system as all the CO2 we've generated in that time. And if the ice continues to decline at the current rate, it could play an even bigger role than greenhouse gases. Professor Wadhams stresses there are uncertainties. Cloud cover over the Arctic could change and help reflect back some of the sun's radiation. But then another greenhouse gas, methane, currently trapped in the Arctic permafrost, could be released with warming and make matters worse. So what does this mean for us? Well, we could end up with more of the kind of weather that deluged so much of June and July.
As the ice melts, this pumps a lot of heat into the lower atmosphere. That has an important effect on the jet stream and the storm track that impinges on Europe. and can change the weather on seasonal timescales. For example, some studies suggest that there is increased risk of wet, low-pressure summers over the UK as the ice melts, and other studies suggest that the winter weather could become more easterly, cold and snowy due to the Arctic ice decline.
All of which raises questions for both sides of the debate about how best to respond to our changing climate. Do we need a new Manhattan Project, ambitious engineering schemes such as mirrors in space or artificial seeding of clouds to keep the planet cool? Or does it reinforce calls for urgent action to save the Arctic by cutting carbon emissions?
Well, the very question we want to discuss now with Natalie Bennett, who's the new leader of the Green Party, and Peter Lilley, who's just written a pretty extensive rebuttal of the Stern findings on climate change, Stern Committee findings. Now, if that analysis is correct about what's happened to the Arctic and what the consequence is, there is really precious little point in making any of the adjustments to our lifestyle that you and the Green Party seem to be suggesting.
Not at all. What we can do is we can still make a big impact in cutting our carbon emissions. And the thing is, by cutting our carbon emissions, we can also act in ways that make our society better and stronger. We can invest in our future of our society, and we must do that now. We just saw those figures in terms of the ice melt. We need to act, and we need to act now.
But if the effect of the melting ice cap, or melted ice cap, is as is suggested, that'll make damn all difference.
Well, let's think about how we can actually make a difference to people's lives. What we want to do is bring industries back into Britain, bring farming back into Britain.
Well, that's
cut the length of our
entirely another point. It's not climate change, is it?
No, it very much is, because what we need to do is shorten our supply chains, use much less fossil fuels.
Why?
Because then we won't have the carbon emissions
that
that are having the effect we've just been
What's
seeing.
the point?
We can cut further damage, reduce the further damage, if we act now and immediately, which is what we need to do.
Peter Lilley.
I was told to come on this programme and not discuss the science, to take the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change assessment as a correct projection of what the likely trends were going to be, and I was happy to do that. Instead, you presented something which purports to be new evidence that contains nothing new, which is tendentious, not peer-reviewed, by a well-known alarmist, and absolute bunkum, compared with the IPCC. The IPCC's forecast is this, not what you've just predicted. The IPCC says sea ice is projected to shrink in both the Arctic and Antarctic under all scenarios. In some projections, Arctic late summer ice disappears almost entirely by the latter part of the 21st century. They then present a graph of all the different projections. None of them shows it melting before the year 2070 on a regular basis in the summer. Now, of course, it used to melt from time to time. In the 30s, it was much warmer in the Antarctic. So you've got a very tendentious piece of presentation there by someone who's disagreeing with the IPCC science.
But you do
it's the BBC's policy not to broadcast anyone who thinks the IPCC
you do
is
accept that
excessive.
climate change is
I
happening.
do, and I want to work on the basis of the IPCC science, not something that's concocted by the BBC in a rather alarmist fashion, which isn't peer-reviewed, which none of us have seen before.
I'm afraid the
and which
BBC is just not sufficiently coordinated to manage to concoct something like that.
It did. It just has.
Now, there is a report presented by our science editor speaking to someone who frankly knows a great deal more about this than certainly I do, and I suggest than any of the three of us
No,
does.
not than I do.
Not than you do. You know better than this chap who spent a lifetime in the subject.
Well, I do. I know what the IPCC says, and I think that their assessment of the science is better than Professor Wadham, who is a well-known alarmist.
We do know that consistently all of the indicators of climate change, of global warming, have moved much faster than scientists have predicted. Everything has been everything has been at the upper end of projections, or well beyond the on the projections.
Except the temperature.
So the fact is, really, Mr. Lilley, what you represent are the last throes of a dying argument.
No.
The Economist totally accepts that climate change is happening and much faster than expected.
He's accepted that climate change is happening.
The Geological Association of America last year entitled its conference as being about the Anthropocene. We have created a new geological era through human activities.
There's no dispute between the two of you about whether something is changing in the climate. There's no dispute there. So let's just get that out of the way. The question is what needs to be done or what can be done.
Well, I think we need to take project forward what is likely to happen on the basis of the best scientific evidence. And the IPCC provides that, not some BBC bit like that. That, and then work out the economics, and only do things where the costs are less than the benefits. That's what we ought to be doing. I've assessed the Stern report, and looking at the Stern report, he says, even on his worst scenario that he depicts, if we take the action that he proposes, the costs will exceed the benefits for the first century. So we're talking of doing something where any returns are going to accrue to people more than a century hence. Should we be doing that? Well, the Green Party may think so.
Well, I don't know. Let's find out. Let's just find out a couple of Green. I mean, do you want us all to stop flying in the Green Party now?
No, we don't want you all to stop flying. We don't
want
want
to stop owning cars, that sort of thing.
Well, actually, that's not what Stern proposes. So let's be sensible. I think you're being unfair to the Green Party.
No, I'm just asking what the Green Party policy was on these matters.
No, what we'd like to do is to relocalise our industries, bring farming back into the UK, stop flying peas from Peru and beans from Kenya. We want to bring jobs, we want to bring industries back into the UK. All of these are things that are very much positives for the UK and are good to reducing our carbon emissions at the same time. We can insulate people's homes so that then we have a situation where people have warmer homes, more comfortable homes, lower fuel bills and lower carbon emissions.
The benefits way outweigh the cost, do you?
Very much so. We can give everyone in Britain a much more comfortable, healthier life.
Timing
we can create
is key
jobs.
Here, isn't it?
Well, let's look at the situation of the green business. It's now, the green economy now accounts for about 9% of the British economy. That's about the same as the finance industries. 5% of growth rate every year, year on year. A third of the growth in the UK last year came from the green industries.
So what do you say to that?
Well, that's sort of, if we spend lots on subsidies, we will get a growth in those subsidised industries at the expense of all the other industries which are paying the taxes. If you spend a lot of money on building wind turbines, you'll get employment in erecting wind turbines. You'll get less employment in erecting gas turbines, which are much more efficient because you're not producing them.
All right.
So it's just transferring employment from one part of the economy to the other.
Let's just leave it there for the time being.
But hang on. I do want to resent the idea that we should impoverish the people of Kenya and Peru by stopping trading with them. That seems to me manifestly cruel.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there because unfortunately people have got to get their cocoa. Good. Thank you both, which is doubtless being imported from somewhere or other and will still be imported under your regime. Thank you. Okay, well that's all from Newsnight tonight. More tomorrow, but until then, good night.